Госпожа Дайсон, я очень рад возможности увидеться с вами и задать несколько вопросов. Скажите, пожалуйста, это правда, что вы поставили на Россию $5000, что она станет одним из лидеров информационного рынка?
Да, я так сделала. Потому что я верю, что так будет, и также, мне кажется, надо показать доверие.
Скажите, а что вселяет в вас такой оптимизм?
Потому что здесь так много хороших мозгей, и у вас это не только математические знания, но также creativity, творчественность. Let's do English? Okay, fine. It's too complicated. Okay. I'm optimistic because people here are not just smart, they're creative. And it seems to me that as the world grows flatter, the Russians have a real edge in programming mathematical creativity. I didn't say Russia would be the source of all the great companies. I said it would be the source of many, many great programmers. Unfortunately, many of them not working in Russia because the conditions for starting and especially for growing a business are much better in the US. There's a lot of people here who have great technical creativity who probably won't be able to build great companies. But there are also some who are brilliant that you've never heard of, so there's no point really in giving you their names because they're still startups.
Госпожа Дайсон, из присутствующих на рынке проектов, какие заслуживают внимания?
Well, obviously, they're the ones that are already well known. There's Yandex itself. I'm on the board of Yandex. I'm biased. There's Igor Ashmanov and those guys, the Kaspersky and his team. There are lots of startups you haven't heard of. There's the people who do a lot of language stuff, Prompt and people like that in St. Petersburg. And just a whole lot of real mathematical talent. Sometimes there's a lot of mathematical talent in programming. There isn't as much business knowledge, which is why you don't see the number of successful companies that you see, for example, in Silicon Valley. But in terms of programming and algorithms and stuff like that, Russia's really, really strong.
А что делает проекты успешными?
Well, the difference between success and not success usually is it has very little to do with technical creativity. It has much more to do with being organized, being disciplined, understanding the business side, understanding marketing, being able to build a team, and then being able to manage a team. Because one brilliant guy can't create a company. A brilliant programmer plus 2 or 3 really strong business people can then build something that will grow. Then they need to figure out the business model, how to generate revenues, how to hire people, how to deal with regulatory requirements. They have to understand the customer base. Most of these questions have very little to do with technical brilliance. If the startup fails, you lose all your money. And sometimes take for example, Cyberco, which failed. Or it more or less failed. And it was run by David Young, who started Abby. And if David came to me with a third company, I would invest in it. Because even though the startup failed, I thought the guy was good. Sometimes things fail, and that's the cost of an education. So after the first failure, the person knows what not to do, and the second time around will do it better. Yeah, you need someone who's capable of learning from mistakes. You don't usually learn from succeeding. From succeeding, you think everything you do is brilliant. When you fail, you understand what you did right and what you did wrong, if you're smart.
Госпожа Дайсон, а вы инвестировали в российские компании?
Yes. I've invested. I was an investor in DPI, which got sold to Lanit. I'm an investor in IBS Group, in Yandex, in Terralink. I'm trying to think, in another one called Dulance.
Когда вы решаете делать инвестиции, на что вы смотрите, на что обращаете внимание?
Yeah, when I invest in a company, the most important thing in the end is the people, because the people come up with the idea, and the people also probably have to change the idea, because you start with this brilliant idea and then you discover, someone else is doing the same thing, maybe we should change it, or perhaps the business model wasn't as good as it should be, or whatever, something changes. And so you need a team that's good enough to change and still succeed. Then you want an idea that makes sense, even though it may change. So again, it's the people that are the most important. Ideally, you want them to be doing something that you think will be successful. But it's very hard to be precise about what you're looking for. If you're lucky, you find someone who's already done 3 startups and has been successful and has a good reputation, and but you rarely find that. Usually you find somebody who seems really smart, has never done anything before, his idea is brilliant, but you're not sure he can run a business, and so forth and so on. So there's a difference between reality and what you're looking for.
А сколько у вас было неудачных вложений?
Oh, probably 10. And then I have maybe 15 really good successes. And then I have probably 40, this is not just in Russia, 40 that are still alive but not yet really successes.
Эстер, в каждом своем письме вы призываете совершать новые ошибки. Очень странный призыв, ведь все воспитываются в историях успеха.
Well, I request to make new mistakes. And you can't learn without mistakes. Starting with, if you believe in evolution, a mistake is basically a failed attempt. You can't achieve anything without attempts. And you can't make attempts without having some set of them that fail. If you're not trying new things, you're not going to learn new things, you're not going to come up with new ideas. A certain percentage of them are always going to fail. So when I say make new mistakes, what it really means is make an even larger number of attempts, some of which will succeed. So the mistakes are they're a sign that you're doing new and creative stuff, and ideally that you're learning from it. When you say new mistakes, it means don't make the same old mistakes. If you make new ones, it's a sign you're doing new things.
Какая помощь и поддержка нужна начинающей компании?
Well, for a startup, what's most important is what they don't have. And so typically, because they're a startup, they have very little money, they have very little experience, they don't have a customer base. So as an investor, you try and give them everything that they need. Usually they have an idea. They probably need some refining of the idea. Some of it, obviously, they can bring themselves. With luck, they know other people to hire and so forth. But every startup needs, especially if it's a startup started by a new person, it needs all the experience that any startup doesn't have, in addition to money to hire people and do marketing and so forth and so on. Someone with just a piece of paper and no track record is going to have a hard time getting money. Someone who, and frequently if you find someone young who has an idea for a startup, I might say, well, it's a really great idea, but you should go work in a real company for 2 or 3 years just to learn how to run a real company. What's in shortest supply here in Russia, in fact, is experience in startups, knowing how to build a team, how to motivate people, how to make that step from being a small team to actually being a company, where the CEO doesn't do everything and doesn't know everything that goes on. So the CEO needs to learn how to delegate and hire people who are better than he or she is. And it's kind of scary. You're 24 years old and now you hire this 35-year-old person to run sales. But you have to do that, because if you're 24 and everybody you hire is 22, they're not going to be able to have the experience that you need to build a real company.
Расскажите о вашем космическом опыте.
Well, it wasn't a space experience. It was a ground experience about space, but it was wonderful. I'm now a trained cosmonaut.
So
I can-
you can fly anytime.
I can fly any time if I have the money or the authority. And what was really neat was being embedded within Roscosmos on the one hand and NASA on the other, and being part of that community. So it was interesting to learn about pressure valves. My Russian got much better, even though I'm speaking in English. When probably one of the best moments when Gennady Padalka, Michael Barrett, and Charles Simoni launched in April, and I was in Baikonur watching the Soyuz go up. I knew what was going on inside because I'd been through the training so many times, and I knew the people. So that was the third time I'd seen it launch, but it was very, very different seeing it with all the knowledge that I had and watching these guys I knew go up into space. I'd like very much to go. I don't have the money, but now I've got much more knowledge and much more passion for investing in new space, in space startups. That we've been discussing computer startups, and even that is a challenging field. Space startups aren't like computer startups. You can't simply write some software and then start a website. You need to actually build spacecraft. You need to build pressure-containing devices. You need spacesuits and all kinds of safety equipment. But I do think it's possible to do it more cheaply than either NASA or Russia does, and to do it with new technology. And that's what really excites me. It's worth noting that mistakes in space are also more dangerous than mistakes in software. And I do think at some point people are going to die going up into space, but people die in cars, people die in buses. The world cannot be an entirely safe place, and mistakes are the cost of progress, which is why personally I'd be happy to go up into space. I know it's slightly dangerous, but it's a risk worth taking.
Эстер, вы инвестируете в космические стартапы. Скажите, а когда космические полеты будут доступны каждому?
Spaceflight's going to get cheaper. It's never going to be incredibly cheap. It costs more to get someone into space than it costs to get them up into the air and from Moscow to New York. But it doesn't need to cost $40 million. And that, I think, within 10 to 15 years, you're going to see a substantially cheaper ability to get into space. There's the suborbital flights where you go up for 5 minutes, and that right now is 100,000. It's very nice, but it's not really in space. It's kind of touching space and coming back. So the second version is you go into orbit, but you're probably still in something that's as big as the shuttle. Visiting the space station is a completely different issue, because that is government property, and it's not designed for tourists to come and go. So at some point you need somebody. There's a guy called Bob Bigelow who wants to build a space hotel, which is probably the thing that space tourists will visit in the future. And someone needs to construct that. The International Space Station took a long time to build, and a space hotel similarly would take a while. But at least you'd be starting fresh with new systems that were better designed, more modern, probably, again, they'll make mistakes, and you hope that these mistakes aren't too serious. But one of the problems with the space program right now is both the Russians and the Americans are too scared of making mistakes, and so they're not experimenting enough. They're not doing enough new things. They're not doing things cheaply. And the reason is, of course, governments are very accountable. If the government makes a mistake, everybody gets upset and blames the government, and the government is so responsible. If a startup makes a mistake, well, it was a venture deal. When you invest in a startup, you expect at least 2 or 3 mistakes, maybe one really amazing win, and then the rest are kind of. So in space, our standards are too high, and we don't have the ability to make the mistakes that we could learn from. And that's why private space done by investors rather than public space done by governments, I think, is going to lead to a lot of progress.
Многим людям очень тяжело совершать ошибки. А как давно вы говорите о них с легкостью?
Well, I think I thought of this thing, always make no mistakes, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago. So it's not exactly a new thing. You can't learn without making mistakes. And so people don't make mistakes, but they don't learn. And the culture needs to start being more forgiving, to understand that mistakes are the price of learning. They're the price of trying new things. And I mean, in the U.S., there's this joke. Someone makes a mistake, and let's say it costs $1 million. They have to write off some inventory, or something explodes, whatever, and it costs $1 million. And so someone comes to the boss and says, look, this guy, he made a mistake, it cost $1 million, aren't you going to fire him? And the boss says, you must be crazy. I just spent $1 million educating this guy, and I'm going to keep him because now he knows so much more. So the attitude really matters. And the attitude should be, oh, this person now knows what not to do. There are lots of different mistakes. You need to make quite a few of them to learn. With luck, you can also watch other people's mistakes and learn from those. That's cheaper. But there's nothing like a mistake to make you learn something. And if you look at science, scientific discoveries also, they come from making mistakes. People developing new drugs, they try a lot of drugs. Most of them are mistakes. 1 or 2 of them work. And in evolution, we evolve because evolution creates lots of different attempts. Some things turned into tails and ears, but other things turned into things that weren't used, that were mistakes. But because of those mistakes, we now have ears that are very good at hearing. And it's true in almost every field.
Эстер, у меня есть несколько вопросов от пользователей нашего сайта. Во всем мире сейчас активно обсуждается тема контроля информации. На ваш взгляд, необходимы ли дополнительные меры по контролю интернет-пространства?
It's no more possible to control the internet than it's possible to control people. And if you want complete order, you just need to kill everybody, and then you have complete order, but you have no life and you have no mistakes. And it's actually the same question. You can't have life with some disorder. You can't have learning without some mistakes. It's the price. And, you don't want to control the internet. You certainly want to have rules. But you have to accept some disorder, and it's okay. The world is full of disorder. The internet is no different. It is now a platform for people. And if a movie gets released early, it's actually not as bad as an accident in space.
О чем вы мечтаете?
Well, one thing I dream of is actually going into space. What else? I'm dreaming now of all kinds of interesting discoveries about genomics and how human bodies work, and understanding various diseases better so that we can cure them or make them not happen. If I were really dreaming, I'd dream of a world where everybody was nice and there was peace and so forth. But I dream of moving forward. I don't dream of perfection.